All right, today we are going to talk a little bit about Theodore Roosevelt. And this topic is one which we think is really important that we cover in small group. And part of that is because Theodore Roosevelt, in many ways, um, he changes the nature of the presidency and really what we expect a president to do in terms of creating change in American society. So, hence, we thought it would be important to address this specific president in this setting. So, our essential question for today is who was Theodore Roosevelt and in what ways was he a progressive? I want to talk a little bit about Theodore Roosevelt's background because I think it will give you some context. But it is important that you don't feel like you have to write a good deal of this down. I think a broad summary of who he is and where he comes from is more important. So again, feel free to put your pencils down, just listen, kind of eat it up a little bit, and then do a kind of a quick summary. So let's talk a bit about his background. Roosevelt was a very small child during the Civil War. And he grew up in New York. His father was able to go fight in the Civil War, as most Northern men were. But because he came from wealth, his father could afford to pay for a substitute. And wealthy people could afford to do that in the North, to pay for a substitute. And that really bothered Theodore Roosevelt. We know that. He writes about that really concerned him because he believed that it was an obligation to serve one's country. And so understand that means two things. One, that Roosevelt comes from wealth. His family, in fact, for multi-generations had lived in the United States before it was the United States. And then secondly, that he has this understanding of service to a country. And that will factor in a little bit more actually in a unit we'll be studying next. So what does this really mean? I think it means that Roosevelt kind of understands this concept of service and understands it well. He is a well-educated man. And after leaving college, he ends up serving as a police commissioner of New York City, and then eventually serves in the state legislature, right? Like our version of what we have in Olympia. He does that for New York. He does marry. He marries relatively young, and he marries the love of his life. Her name is Alice. And this is important in the story because it helps you kind of understand a little bit about who he is too. Alice is pregnant, and he is working up at the State House in Albany when he gets news that Alice is not doing well. And she's late, very late in her pregnancy, in fact, ready to deliver the baby at any time. So he finds out that Alice is not well. He gets on a train, boards a train, heads down to their home just outside of New York City, only to enter the door to find out that Alice has died. And she was able to successfully deliver the baby, which they named Alice. He named Alice. And so he finds that his wife is dead, his daughter is born, and he turns to his sister, and his sister has run off. And come to find out, it is because his mother had also died within sort of minutes of Alice dying. And she had been staying in the house to help Alice. So Theodore Roosevelt's mother and his wife died on the same day. Here's the heartbreaker, friends. It was Valentine's Day. And we know that he writes in his journal that night, "The light in my life has gone out." He is now a single father, left with a newborn daughter and really unsure as to what to do and how to handle that because, let's face it, you guys, this is the late 1800s. He wasn't very well equipped with how to manage all of that. Societal norms did not have single dads raising kids. And so he decides he has to leave. He doesn't know how to do this job of being a single dad. And he leaves his daughter, Alice, with his sister. And then he takes off and he heads out west and he comes to Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, and he works as a cowboy on a ranch. It's really important to him to spend some time with nature. And as he's out west, he starts writing. He writes a variety of books, everything from travel books to westerns. He writes a history of naval warfare. He is just very busy. And it's his way of dealing with sort of this awfulness that's happened in his life. However, while he's out west, he starts corresponding with an old friend, and her name is Edith. And that's Edith right here on the screen. And you can kind of guess what happens next, but he ends up marrying Edith. Alice moves back in with the family. He takes Alice from his sister. Edith agrees to raise Alice, and then they have several other children, which you see pictured here. We'll fast forward a little bit that Theodore Roosevelt is asked to serve as Vice President of the United States, or run, I should say, as Vice President of the United States, along with a president named William McKinley. And William McKinley is assassinated in 1901, and Theodore Roosevelt becomes the president. And so, in process, Theodore Roosevelt was actually not elected to be president for his very first term, but in fact is taking over for William McKinley. I want to talk a little bit about how he approaches the office of president. He really believed in what's called the square deal, and that's this concept that government's job is to protect the people, to serve the people, and to do what's right for the people. And you might go, well, yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer, Ms. Condit. That's kind of what I see today. But the reality was that was not necessarily how presidents approached their job. They really thought that, the president really shouldn't govern much. They certainly wouldn't take a very active role in domestic affairs. They might deal with foreign policy like wars and stuff, tariffs and stuff. But he doesn't see the presidency that way. He saw himself kind of as what we call the bully pulpit, this idea that the president is the leader of the nation. Now, I think we look at this today in 2020 and say, of course, the president is the leader of the nation, right? Like, I know we have 3 equal branches, but really, it sure feels like the president's in charge. This concept of the president feeling like he's in charge and seeming that way to the American public really does emerge with Theodore Roosevelt. Prior presidents just didn't operate all that much. And even if we look at Lincoln as an example, the Congress is very powerful. The Supreme Court is quite powerful. Lincoln is is part of one of the 3 branches of government, which really were deemed equal. But under Roosevelt's presidency, we start to see the president feel a little more elevated above the other branches. Let's talk a little bit about some of those policies and ways in which he thought that the government should protect the people. So the first of these is through antitrust. Antitrust is trust busting. It means breaking up monopolies. He believed it was the job of government to break up monopolies. But make no mistake, friends, he saw that some monopolies were good and some monopolies were bad. And we would say these are good trusts or bad trusts. And so he believed it was the job of government to break up the bad ones. To break up the bad monopolies, but to allow the good ones to continue. So examples of bad monopolies, according to Roosevelt, that he tried to break up would be Standard Oil, the railroad industry. He felt that those were not necessarily good for the American people. What else does he try to break up? Well, he's working in the area of tariff policy. He believed it was important to lower the tariff. And we've chatted a little bit about how tariffs have this impact, right? Like they're really, they support American businesses because it makes it cheaper for the consumer to buy goods here in the United States, made here in the United States. But it can be really bad for people who are trying to export their goods or sell them overseas. An example of that would be farmers, right? American farmers need to sell their crops overseas. When tariffs are really high, it's really hard to do that. So he believed it was important to lower those tariffs. He's also the president that establishes a variety of government agencies, including the Food and Drug Act, the Food and Drug Administration. And you've read The Jungle, and The Jungle talks about some reasons why we might want the Food and Drug Administration. He also is the founder of the U.S. Forest Service. And in fact, Gifford Pinchot National Forest, which is just right up the Lewis River Road, you just keep going, you hit it. That forest was created under his presidency. Gifford Pinchot was the first forest director established under the Roosevelt administration. But he really sets into motion this concept of what a progressive president is. And I'll put this clip up here for you so that you can access it. But keep in mind that he sees his job as helping the American people. And it's really important to him to do those things. I think we see President Roosevelt, though, because he is such an active player in government, he is also easily criticized. And so there's some political cartoons in this slideshow that you could take a look at. I'd encourage you to pause me at this point in time and to go through this 3-step process of what I've taught you is how to analyze political cartoons. So please take a few moments and look at this political cartoon. And then I'll want you to take a look at this political cartoon speaking to the trusts. So as questions emerge, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Hopefully you've begun to see how Theodore Roosevelt shapes the presidency and thinks about his role being a little bit different than other U.S. presidents. And hopefully you're starting to see him in these imageries of as a figure, as a character in political cartoons.